Emira Business FM. The sound of success.
It's Emira Business FM. The UAE's event scene is a vibrant scene. Concerts, festivals, there are major global gatherings, but it's hit pause amidst regional tensions. Some events are on hold. The biggest story, though, might be one of resilience. The UAE's built one of the world's most dynamic, I think it's fair to say, tourism and events economies. History has shown that it has a strong ability to bounce back. What is the real economic impact when it is disrupted? And could this actually set the stage for an even stronger rebound? Those are some of the questions. Joining us to discuss those, Dr. Jelena Janjusevic is Associate Professor and Deputy Global Head of Accounting, Economics and Finance at Edinburgh Business School, Heriot-Watt University in Dubai. Dr. Jelena, it's good to be able to welcome you back.
Thank you for having me, and good morning to your listeners.
We've got you perfectly well over Zoom. I can hear you fine. Thanks for coming back on. To begin with, can you quantify the importance of the events and the concert sector to the UAE economy? Can you put that in context for us?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. And we discussed this several weeks ago. We had a little bit different perspective at the moment, right? The events were a little bit different, but absolutely. Events and concert sector in UAE is having really a strategic economic role. And it is not simply the part of the entertainment industry. It's really acting as a high impact demand generator within the non-oil economy, which is activating aviation, hospitality, retail, transport, and the broader service sector and service ecosystem simultaneously. So from a macroeconomic perspective, this sector contributes through the tourism inflows as a form of a service export, because tourism is actually export. It is also contributing through the high value consumption and global positioning of the UAE as a destination. So event-driven demand is extremely valuable and actually very specific for the international events is the 30 to 50% of attendees are non-residents. So these are international visitors who are, as experience, spending 20 to 40% more per them than average tourists. So for UAE events, and this is very important to stress, are not peripheral, they are embedded in the UAE economic diversification strategy.
It's important to remember that. I mean, in recent weeks, we've seen high-profile shows by Amr Diab, the Wu-Tang Clan, Christina Aguilera, Shakira at the Off-Limits Festival, all postponed. Art Dubai, Arabian travel market have been pushed back. A World Economic Forum conference scheduled in Jeddah next month has been postponed. F1 in Saudi Arabia and Bahrain obviously cancelled as well. From an accounting and finance perspective, when a global tour is left to dangle in the UAE, in the region, what's the immediate velocity of loss for the local ecosystem, from travel to hotels to freelance tech crews to audiences and beyond?
Yeah. Well, if you allow, I would like to stress that what we are currently observing is best understood as a geopolitical shock translated into economic confidence shock, particularly as we said, through the tourism, aviation, and events. But what is important to mention is that this is not a reflection of weakness within the economy itself in UAE or Middle East. So this is externally driven disruption that is obviously affecting mobility, consumer behavior, and short-term decision-making. And short-term is extremely important a point here. So to put it into the scale, into the context, so global estimates are suggesting that travel and tourism activity is currently losing around 600 million per day, which is just to highlight the intensity of this shock, okay? But this is more front-loaded and cyclical rather than structural, and this is really important. Now, as I said, short-term, and as you very well recognize, is maybe the key point here. And yes, this is a short-term shock still, And in the short term, the impact is immediate, and that is concentrated actually, and particularly in the sectors that depend on timing and that depend on volume. So what we are seeing in a short term is, first of all, the softer hotel occupancy during expected peak periods, airline disruptions, capacity adjustments in the airlines, reduced activity across retail, reduced activity across hospitality in general. So there are some data that are suggesting that there were over 80,000 travel bookings cancelled in Dubai within just first week of the heightened tensions, and regional tourism could decline by 10 to 25% in 2026. But this depends definitely how long the uncertainty persists. So from economic point of view, this is temporal demand shock. So as you stress mentioning all these events, majority of them are not cancelled, they are postponed. So they are not temporarily lost. However, this is more on the macroeconomic and the economy perspective, overall country. But we shouldn't forget that there are, at a firm level, these are more acute. So businesses like SMEs, entrepreneurs, they are facing with the cash flow pressures and operational shocks. So expected revenues are postponed while costs remain fixed. And this is the point from accountancy, from financial point of view. You have fixed costs, which are quite big especially in hospitality and service sector. And they persist, right? No matter if there is activity, if there is revenue, so these costs still have to be covered, and that's why the shock is big. So this operational efficiency, the deal with liquidity, is quite acute for the SMEs and entrepreneurs, and then longer the period of this shock is, then the more bigger the effects and negative effects are. So yes, this is still a short-term impact, so let's hope it will stay like that.
It's a very tough time, particularly for the smaller event management firms that rely, and the hospitality firms that rely on the Q1, Q2 peak season. Dr. Jelena, which industries tend to feel the impact of the tensions that we're experiencing now first, and which recover the fastest?
Yeah, so there is actually this transmission of the shock actually is following very clear economic pattern. So the first sectors that are affected are those that are very much dependent on the advanced bookings and the fixed scheduling. So primarily airlines, hotels, event organizers. Then the second layer, the second round of impact is felt in the sectors that rely on a footfall, so like restaurants, retail, local transport. So from financial perspective, this intensity of impact is amplified by the operating leverage. And I'm again stressing here operating leverage, again, fixed cost, which can even exceed 60% of the total cost in hospitality, actually mean that even the small drop in demand actually can significantly affect profitability. Now, in terms of the recovery, aviation and hospitality actually tend to rebound quite fast due to dynamic pricing that is specific for them, and actually flexibility when it comes to the capacity. Then this is followed by retail and food services, where spending actually is typically deferred rather than completely eliminated.
The UAE has navigated disruptions before. Expo 2020 had to be delayed for a full year, unexpectedly, because of COVID, of course. And that turned out to be, I think it would be fair to say, pretty huge success. What is it here in the UAE that adds up to such a strong recovery model?
Yeah, this is actually where especially all of us who are living and working in UAE for many years, we witness that really very strong recovery model and resilience in UAE. And probably this is where I would say optimism is coming, that we are all waiting for a moment that this situation ends, and then we really expect a fast recovery. And this UAE resilience actually is not something that is ad hoc or that is happening from moment to moment and responding to different situations. This is really structural rather than situational. You mentioned already several occasions when we really witnessed how quickly and how successfully UAE recovered. And where this structural resilience lay in is first, it has already invested heavily in a world-class infrastructure, and we shouldn't forget that. So airports in UAE, airlines, venues, hospitality, this is all allowing for very rapid reactivation without any additional capital investment. This is extremely important. Then UAE is positioned as a global connectivity hub. And this is still enabling a quick return of international flows once the conditions stabilize. And of course, very important, and this is really specific of the UAE, is that institutions, so institutionally, there is a strong agility. So UAE demonstrating during previous disruptions like crisis in 2008, COVID especially, where there is this coordinated response, and this coordinated response is actually helping the activities restore much quickly and more successfully. UAE, at the moment, though there is a disruption in extremely, really stressful events and really critical economic the disruption that is happening, but we are still seeing ongoing investment activity in the UAE. And this is signaling that investors are very clearly distinguishing short-term geopolitical risk and long-term economic fundamentals. So there is still confidence in a later. And all these events that are postponed rather than cancelled are a good indicator.
There's an element, isn't there, that if you postpone something rather than cancel it, you preserve value.
Exactly. And this is actually critical distinction from economic point of view and from financial point of view and perspective. Postponement actually preserves demand curve, while on another side, cancellation will destroy it. So we still have economic value preserved. Actually, in many cases, some data are suggesting that between 17 to 90% of ticket demand is retained when events are rescheduled, meaning that revenue is not lost, it is just shifted across the time. Of course, this is not easy, and a key point here, I mentioned previously, key variable here is duration. So if uncertainty persists, then postponements may eventually convert into the cancellation. And then, of course, we can see more permanent economic effect, absolutely.
How about in terms of pent-up demand? Something I think we saw after 2020, it's reasonable to say, there was a massive surge in what was almost like revenge spending on entertainment, kind of. Could we be looking at a rebound effect for, I don't know, late 2026? If these shows that we've mentioned, some of these shows, are rescheduled for Q4, do we see a double-digit spike in GDP contribution then, maybe?
Yeah, I strongly believe in that, and that what I'm saying just now is based on the previous experience. And yes, actually, this is very important dynamic. When consumers delay travel or even participation, they typically reallocate rather than cancel those activities, and this creates pent-up demand, which can actually lead to compressed recovery phase. Actually, historically, this shown that it can really result in 10 to 20% surge in demand once the conditions stabilize and as postponed consumption actually returns in a concentrated period. So paradoxically, actually, sometimes short-term disruptions can lead to even stronger than expected performance during recovery, and this could really happen here.
I'm so hopeful that happens, I have to say. Dr. Jelena, you're an associate professor of finance. You look at fine print day to day. You understand how to get to the crux of the matter, even if you are looking at the fine print. How might some of this disruption be mitigated, perhaps, by force majeure clauses in, the insurance around, cancelled events?
Yeah. Well, I would say that we are already seeing some signs of resilience. I know it's very tough time, and especially for individuals, for residents, it's really the uncertainty is huge, right? And you know, in finance and economics, there is a big distinction between risk and uncertainty. Risk is something to which we can assign probability, right? So we can create scenarios and say, in this scenario, we can give probability of 20, 30%, and so on. With uncertainty, you can't do that. And the uncertainty is very much linked with the time. So with duration, so longer the duration uncertainty is higher, and this is where, you know, the economics and the finance is struggling then to provide, and any expert is not really keen to provide any estimates. But there are certain signs that we shouldn't disregard, and of resilience within the industry, and this is really important in that regard. So there are certain signs of adoptions already. So we all face that airlines are very successfully and strongly adjusting routes and capacity. So even in a situation of a war, we are seeing that airlines are still operating, that flights are happening. So this is extremely important, and this is not very usual situation. So UAE is reacting very, very well. So airlines are adjusting routes, they are adjusting capacities. Even so, organizers, as I said, they are still rescheduling. Hospitality providers are also adjusting and adapting pricing strategies. So from financial perspective, this actually reflects market flexibility rather than the system stress. So we can say that we are seeing early signals of recovery potential through forward-looking indicators. There are some indicators showing that there are airline bookings and travel trends which tend to recover actually before activity resumes. Now, one thing that is very important that I want to stress here is the infrastructure in UAE is one of the strongest advantages, and this is where my optimism is also coming from. So this country has built capacity to handle tens of millions of visitors annually, with Dubai International Airport alone handling close to 90 million passengers just pre-disruption. So this means that recovery is not constrained by capacity, and this is extremely important. So recovery is actually driven by demand reactivation. And in this situation, once the things are getting back to normal, we can actually see that demand reactivation really rapidly recovering. So in economic terms, this significantly reduces recovery time because the system is already in place and it is operational.
It's interesting, I was going to ask you about infrastructure because unlike many global cities, Dubai, Abu Dhabi own the entire value chain, the airlines, the venues, the hotels. So there's an integrated ownership model, and I wonder if that will help the UAE bounce back even faster than a city that relies on a more fragmented approach with lots more private operators.
Oh, absolutely. I think this is really a critical thing. As I mentioned at the very beginning, UAE has already that infrastructure in terms of really world-class airline, airports, hospitality system, travel. So this is so practically once this ends, we do not expect significant or any capital investment, and this is extremely important from the finance and economic perspective because we can just resume activities very quickly. Now, of course, when it comes to events, tourism, destination generally, right? It's a lot about the trust, and this affects the behavior, tourist behavior, event participants, event organizers, right, who are coming from abroad. So we have to. So that trust should be there. The current reaction of the government to the attacks, responses, and success of interception. This is building trust also. Having that infrastructure already and capacities and ability, as I said, to be agile, to to fast react and be flexible, to have this coordinated institutional agility. This is extremely important, and this is where the trust is that the recovery can be quite fast. I mentioned the event organizers who are coming outside of the country, and so maybe sometimes us who are within the country, right? We sometimes maybe do not have the whole picture, but actually, when we look at the reactions and behaviors of those who are coming outside, like suppliers, event organizers in this particular situation, global event organizers are stakeholders who are highly responsive to stability and demand conditions. So this is where trust is playing a big role. So they prioritize destinations that offer reliable infrastructure, that have a strong audience demand, and that have operational certainty. So the UAE, we shouldn't forget, meets consistently these criteria, which is why historically organizers return quickly once conditions stabilize. Which we saw in as you said, COVID, Expo 2020, and so on. So often maintaining these long-term commitments to the market.
Well, there were many questions and answered, I guess. The experience of COVID has helped in many ways. I mean, the hope is that this is a moment that could actually strengthen the UAE's reputation as a reliable global events hub, depending on the bounce back, of course. But what indicators should businesses watch to gauge when, recovery is really underway?
Yeah, absolutely. Indicators is something to watch. The most important indicators are leading, not lagging. And this is this forward airline booking, hotel reservation trends to look for, event rescheduling. Again, very important signal is that events are not canceled, they are rescheduled. Then online travel surge behavior, these are the indicators to look for. And this is something that actually is at the moment providing early signals of confidence returning, which is the key driver of recovery. Now we will see how quickly the country will recover, and that again depends very much on the duration of this disruption, but yeah, I think that if in the best case scenario, if this is if the activities is to resume in a couple of weeks, not more than, let's say, 1 or 2 months, then we can see the recovery maybe that can be within some 1 to 2 quarters based on the previous disruption patterns. But again, as I really want to stress here that the critical variable here is really not infrastructure, it's not capacity to recover, it is really the speed at which perceived risk declines and confidence returns. So trust, confidence, and how the risk is perceived is definitely something that will influence the recovery.
It makes a lot of sense. It really does. Lessons from the COVID era are being learned, and we are applying them, of course. Dr. Jelena Janjusevic is Associate Professor, Deputy Global Head of Accounting, Economics and Finance at Edinburgh Business School, Heriot-Watt University, based here in Dubai. Dr. Jelena, pleasure to have you back on. Thank you for joining us again.
Thank you for having me, and have a lovely day ahead. And take care, stay safe.
Thank you very much for joining us. Dr. Jelena Janjusevic here on Mira Business FM.